it's impossible not to look at all of these massive red flags with him and not at least wonder if this is going to work out. And so what I think happened, and I think by this point it's been pretty well detailed, but the team wanted Russell Wilson, wanted Aaron Rodgers, couldn't get either guy, didn't feel comfortable going hard after Deshaun Watson, and then really got concerned about something like, well, Mitchell Trubisky may not want to come here. He might choose another team over us. We're not in love with trading for, say, Jimmy Garoppolo. And if Carson Wentz gets cut, he may not choose us. So let's go ahead and make this trade for Wentz. We can maybe possibly sell Wentz as an answer at quarterback, and we'll be willing to give up what we need to give up. So I do think that that's what happened. I think it's good that the team can get out of the contract after just one season. And I do think that the team very much should be open to drafting a quarterback. But yeah, was this in part a panic move? It was. Doesn't mean it can't work, but I don't think you can look at this and say, this is what they wanted to do all along. No, it wasn't.
What's going on, y'all? This is Mual, your host of the Galdi Podcast, and I'm just here to tell you, man, while you're here, if you're new, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button, make sure you follow us, man, as we continue to push out this content and create some things for the Washington Commanders and the NFL, man, but mainly the Commanders. This is a Washington channel. I want everybody to be involved. I want everybody to catch these live streams weekly. I want everybody to be a part of this growth that we got going on over here, man. So if you're here, if you're new, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you stay tuned, man, for much more content, fire content, and as we keep things pushing, man. So yeah, get to it. We appreciate it. All that good stuff. Peace. Welcome back to another episode of the Galdi Podcast, provided to you by 214 Media. I'm your host, Mual, Coach Mual, Henny Mual, all that good stuff. I got Dre with me. AJ will be on the way. And ladies and gentlemen, joining us, we have our Galdi, man. Galdi has been a staple in the DMV as it relates to DMV sports for about I feel like a decade now. And to be honest, Dre, he's the first person I ever heard in sports talk radio play go-go on the radio, and
Go Thursdays.
It instantly boosted my respect for Galdi, man. But first and foremost, man, I appreciate you checking in. How are you doing?
Good, man. I appreciate you guys having me on very much. So thank you.
Absolutely. Now, now let me ask you, whose idea was it to say, you know what, I'm gonna start playing go-go on Thursdays, man? let the people know from the DMV area how we get down. Whose idea was that? Was that yours?
That was mine. Yeah, I mean, when I was, and I remember I first got introduced to go-go in high school. So I graduated high school in 97. So in the 90s, go-go, you could hear it on the radio. And so, I liked it. And then as I got older and I would go out, when I would be in the car at night, some of the local stations like PGC and KYS would play go-go. But they didn't play it all the time, and they seemed to only play it late at night. Occasionally, during lunchtime, they'd play it, and I was always this is really underserved. This is a musical style that Washington, D.C. is responsible for. It's really, really good, and I just feel like there wasn't enough of it. We didn't hear it often enough. So, when I was on the radio, I was trying to, you always try to come up with ways to stand out and differentiate yourself, and I was like, why don't we try to do something like this? And it was a lot of fun. I mean, people would call in with requests. I actually had people write songs.
I made requests.
Yeah, I mean, people would write songs for Go-Go Thursday, and it was cool because I came to learn even more about go-go. I'm not an expert or anything. I know a little bit, but in hearing from other people and seeing the requests, you get exposed to other artists. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
All right, so one more thing before we get into the win situation, man. One of my friends, sometimes I reach out, to people just to, get some prep questions going and stuff like that. But he did have a personal question for you since we're on the topic of radio. Just would you consider doing that again, or whether it's covering DC teams or just in another state if the the situation presented itself? Is that something that you consider?
Yeah, I mean, I never say never. There's a lot about radio I don't miss, but I mean, I do miss the people. I do miss talking to callers. I do miss, when you're on the radio and something happens and so you have live breaking news that you're dealing with. That's pretty cool. But I mean, there's a lot about radio that isn't great, but I'm very appreciative of my time in radio. But, I would never say never. And if the right opportunity came up, I'm always willing to listen. But, podcasting really is the way the entire industry is going. It's a lot like cable TV versus streaming. Like cable is not going to go away. Radio is not going to go away. But like streaming is where it's at. Like that, people are watching things on demand. And, the idea of like sitting in front of your TV and watching what's on live at that time, like nobody's really doing that anymore. And that's how audio consumption really is. And so podcasting is, like I said, it's growing. The convenience of it you can't beat in terms of you listen when you want for however long you want and come back to it. And so I've really enjoyed doing it. And, I feel like it's something that I really would like to continue doing for years to come. And, it's interesting. I mean, and you guys are an example of this, but in this area, there's a very healthy podcasting world just in this area.
Yes.
Like just for the Commanders alone.
I'm very aware. Commanders is flooded, man. It's a lot of podcasts and stuff like that.
It is. And I think that's telling. Like, I think, it's telling about how much content about the Commanders people want, but I think it also says something about, hey, like, podcasting is where a lot of people get their audio from. And so I've really enjoyed it a lot. There are a lot of benefits to it. But to answer your question, I would never say never. I would never completely shut a door like that.
Hey, well, you do an excellent job, big dog, man. I've been listening to you for a little minute.
Thank you.
Okay, absolutely. All right, so fellas, let's go ahead and get into some Washington talk, man. And let's start the thing off with the most important issue right here. Quarterback, Carson Wentz, Ron Rivera, all that good stuff. So Rivera, I believe Carson Wentz will be his 7th different starting quarterback. Or maybe they already have 7 starting quarterbacks in 33 games with Washington. But there are two sides. A side where people think that the team did the best they could with the context available, the quarterbacks, the market, assessing the free agent market, competition, all those things. But then there's also a side that believes that the team panicked because they were scared they couldn't compete for Watson or for the free agent quarterbacks that were available, given the context and stuff like that. So, Al, what side do you belong to, or do you kind of understand both sides of this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I get both sides. I guess I would say this. So, it didn't have to be that the team had to do something at quarterback this offseason. I've never been comfortable with this thing of like, this is the offseason in which the team has to get a franchise quarterback, do or die. Like, I don't think that's a healthy way to ever go into anything. I think it should always be, okay, if we can get it, great. And if an opportunity presents itself, we'll pounce. But when you put a gun to your own head and you say, we have to do it this offseason or else, what happens is you make panic moves and you overpay for things. And I think that may be what happened here. Now, I do think it's possible that the Wentz trade works out. It's not like he has zero redeeming qualities or anything like that, but it's impossible not to have concerns. It's impossible not to look at all these massive red flags with him and not at least wonder if this is going to work out. And so what I think happened, and I think by this point it's been pretty well detailed, but the team wanted Russell Wilson, wanted Aaron Rodgers, couldn't get either guy, didn't feel comfortable going hard after Deshaun Watson, and then really got concerned about something like, well, Mitchell Trubisky may not want to come here. He might choose another team over us. We're not in love with trading for, say, Jimmy Garoppolo. And if Carson Wentz gets cut, he may not choose us. So let's go ahead and make this trade for Wentz. We can maybe possibly sell Wentz as an answer at quarterback, and we'll be willing to give up what we need to give up. So I do think that that's what happened. I think it's good that the team can get out of the contract after just one season. And I do think that the team very much should be open to drafting a quarterback. But yeah, like, was this in part a panic move? It was. Doesn't mean it can't work, but I don't think you can look at this and say, like, this is what they wanted to do all along. Like, no, it wasn't. They wanted other things, and they kind of set themselves up to where this offseason they felt this extreme pressure to have to do something at quarterback.
Hey, Al, so I listen to the podcast every day, and I've been listening to you, and you said, the last couple of days or so since the trade went down that you had your doubts, which is fair. Everyone has their doubts about this trade, and there's the red flags. But I did listen to the podcast today, and you said he crushed the press conference. Does that press conference, I know it's just talk is cheap, but does that press conference kind of ease a little bit of those doubts and make you feel a little bit better about this situation?
Well, it helps. It does help. I mean, I've said to myself, all right, let's paint a realistic picture of this working out, right? Let's not pretend like all of these concerns are fake, because there's too much smoke for there not to be something here, right? I'm like, the Eagles aren't morons. The Colts aren't morons. Like, there's a reason that the Commanders are Carson's third team in 3 years. So you say, all right, what's a realistic picture in which this works out? Well, I think a picture includes Carson Wentz saying to himself, all right, look, Commanders are my third team in 3 years. Some things haven't gone so well for me in recent years. These things aren't necessarily all my fault, but it's pretty naive of me to think that none of this is my fault. So to whatever extent I've been responsible for any of this stuff, where can I be better? How can I improve? Where can I learn? And, especially given that Carson Wentz is a man of faith, and I think that's been made pretty clear, like, not to get all biblical, but, God does teach us to be humble, right? So you say to yourself, all right, if Carson Wentz is this man of faith, and he very much is a Bible reader and a Bible studier, right? You say, okay, let me recognize that maybe I've gone wrong in some of these previous stops and in some ways, and how can I be better? And the way Wentz came across at that intro presser on Thursday was like someone who recognizes that some of this has been on him. Like, if you listen to specifically what he said to some of the many questions that he got regarding these red flags, he did at times point the finger of blame at himself. He didn't get defensive. I thought he handled those questions really well. And so it suggested to me that maybe, just maybe, there is some growth going on here. One of the things that's impossible to get by is what the Colts GM Chris Ballard said at the Combine earlier this month. And he talked specifically about Wentz needing to demonstrate growth. And Ballard wasn't necessarily super specific about what exactly Wentz needed to grow from. But, when Ballard said Wentz needs to grow from this. Ballard said something like, it'll be interesting to see how Carson grows from all of this. Maybe Wentz took some of that to heart. Ballard did say that day that he had like an hour-long conversation with Wentz earlier that day. It was pretty clear by then that Ballard and the Colts were moving on from Wentz. So if, in fact, Carson is trying to learn from what he's done in his past, to whatever extent he's done things wrong in his past, I think that's encouraging. I mean, this is probably his last opportunity as a true starting quarterback. In other words, a team going into a season with Carson as the starting quarterback and the team wanting to do so. So you would think, as much as there's been this desperation with the Commanders to find an answer at quarterback, you would think there's a desperation with Carson to do well this coming season. And so I look at that and I say, all right, that to me is a realistic picture within which the Carson Wentz trade could work out for the Commanders. I mean, he's not an awful quarterback. It's just you have this thing of like, why is he on another new team again? Why did the Colts give up on him after one season? And why do we have all of these reports and all of these things being said about him lacking leadership and not taking to hard coaching? But he on Thursday came off like a guy who maybe has learned some lessons in recent times here.
That's absolutely right. And I think kind of, since we're speaking about the Colts situation, obviously, and then what's being presented in Washington, Ron had mentioned after Wentz's presser, that he likes Wentz a lot and he believes that, he is their guy and we're building around him. And basically, for all intents and purposes, we plan to have him for the next several years. Additionally, Scott Turner had mentioned that, Wentz had mentioned that he was, very impressed or happy or optimistic or whatever the exact quote he said, but he was happy to work with Scott Turner based on the conversations that they had. I shared this thought with the fellas, and I guess we can kind of go roundtable, but obviously let's get Al's opinion first. But I shared this conversation with these guys on Tuesday, I believe, and one of the things that I had brought into the conversation is that I felt like Wentz's approach in Indy, or Indy's approach in a sense, was more about, let's go ahead, I'm back right quick, was more about a mental approach of not necessarily messing things up. Like heading into a situation, heading into a game, heading into an organization, their game plan is centered around Jonathan Taylor, their offensive line, their run game. Carson Wentz is in a situation where you can't just mess it up. Just don't mess it up. Be a game managing quarterback, XYZ, all of that. However, in Washington, given, again, what Wentz has said, what Ron Rivera has said, and what Scott Turner is believed to have said in the conversation with Wentz, all intents and purposes, he's getting the green light here in Washington, or so it seems. And I think there's two different mentalities that a quarterback or even a player can have when you have somebody who tells you don't mess it up versus go make plays. So I wanted to get your opinion on that in just terms of your opinion on how important the mentality is when you approach new situations versus previous situations that you've been in.
Well, I think to what you just said, I think it's really telling. And I don't think it's just a coincidence that so on Wednesday, when the trade became official, the Commanders on Twitter put out a few things. And one of the things was this brief video of Wentz arriving at team headquarters and Ron Rivera receiving Carson. And the video ends with Ron Rivera telling Wentz, essentially, you're wanted here, or you're here where you're wanted, or whatever it was. And I think that speaks to a lot of what's going on here, you know. And I don't think that's just necessarily about like the Colts traded you, we wanted you. I think that's hitting on the owner of the Colts, Jim Irsay, who pretty clearly wanted Wentz gone. And he may not have been the only one, but he obviously was a principal one. And I think that also does speak to what you were just talking about of you are our guy. I mean, it's interesting. Ron Rivera last year kept talking up a quarterback competition that a lot of people never really believed was legitimate. You know, this idea of Ryan Fitzpatrick versus Taylor Heineke. There's no talk of that. The Commanders on Wednesday literally labeled Carson Wentz their QB1. Ron Rivera on Thursday at the intro presser in his opening remarks labeled Carson Wentz the QB1. I think the approach here very clearly is you are our guy. We are building you up. We are propping you up as our guy. And so when it comes to the offense, I don't think the approach is going to be, hey, just don't screw it up. You know, I think the approach is going to be, you're our guy. We're going to tailor things to you. And we're going to try to make it so that you thrive the way that you have thrived in the past. Now, the question is, well, can he still do that? And, you know, I do think that that's a conversation. But when it comes to like how the team is viewing Carson Wentz, I think the team is trying to set him up for success. Now, look, I think this is a trial run this year. There's a reason that he has that contract and the Commanders can get out of that contract after one season. Now, if they restructure some things and there's more guaranteed money beyond the season, then that'll tell a different tale. But for now, you know, Ron can say, we believe in Carson. We want him here for years to come. And that contract screams, let's see what happens. Okay, he's under contract for 3 years, but the team can get out of it without any dead money after one season. So I think it's smart to play it that way. Under control for 3 years, but you can get out of it after 1 year. That's actually a pretty good situation for the team to be in. But it sure feels like the Commanders are trying to at least present a front of, we believe in you, we wanted you, and we're going to do all we can to thrive with you. So I do think the mentality, I mean, it should be an empowering one. I mean, Carson Wentz should feel pretty good about this situation. You know, he's getting an opportunity here with a team that I think is going to do what it can to set him up for success, and the onus will be on him to deliver on that.
Hey, Al, I just wanted to jump in there. I appreciate you coming on the show with us today. Now, don't you feel that everything that Carson Wentz has exhibited in his career is completely opposite than what Ron Rivera has portrayed of what he wants from a quarterback, such as leadership? From what we know, he still doesn't have a COVID vaccine, so he could possibly miss games. Also, kind of being reckless with the ball. Maybe the stats don't show that, but there probably should have been more than 7 interceptions as far as his 2021 game logging. Don't you feel it's kind of contradictory of everything Ron Rivera has presented that he wants from a QB1?
I think to a certain extent it is. You know, when Dwayne Haskins was here, when Ron took over in the 2020 offseason, Ron incessantly talked about the importance of quarterback leadership. Like every time Ron got asked about Dwayne Haskins, I remember having a conversation with Ron. I asked him about Dwayne, and the first thing he's talked about was leadership. And he's brought it up since then, right? So leadership, that matters so much for a quarterback. Well, you just traded for a guy who has major leadership questions. So that would mean one of two things. Either Ron is completely abandoning his leadership principles and is so desperate for improvement at quarterback and is so desperate for something to click here that he's just trying something that goes against every fiber of his being. Or, and this is what I'm hoping is the case, Ron doesn't think that all of this leadership stuff is true with Carson Wentz. Ron thinks that some of the stuff that's out there with Wentz is fake news. And, you know, it's interesting. Ron on Thursday introduced Wentz. Wentz did the presser, and then after the presser, Ron spoke to reporters off to the side for a decent amount of time. And I have not heard audio of this, but I have read some of the quotes of this. And he did get asked about Wentz. And the question essentially was, you're trading for a guy with all these question marks. What do you think about that? And Ron's answer was, I don't believe everything that's out there. And he talked about how some of the Colts, including multiple team captains, came out very much in defense of Carson Wentz, or at least in support of Carson Wentz. And so, if Ron Rivera, you got to think Ron has talked to a lot of people, right? So if Ron has spoken to people and those people have said to him, you know what, this Wentz stuff is tricky. He's not perfect, but Irsay really soured on Carson. This isn't so much like everyone on the Colts wanting Carson gone. This is more Irsay wanting the Colts gone. Like, if that is what has been presented to Ron, then I start to look at that leadership stuff a little differently. And maybe Ron sees things as, all right, don't believe everything you hear and read about this guy. As far as the COVID vaccine thing goes, I mean, the NFL has dropped its COVID-19 protocols. Maybe at some point they come back. But, I think for the league, for Ron, for Wentz, for Chase Young, for everybody else, I think that stuff kind of, at this point, doesn't matter so much in terms of, like, player availability. Now, if this pandemic takes another turn for the worse, then who the heck knows? But I think we're at a point now where we're probably done with that being an issue. Hopefully we're done with that being an issue. And so I don't think that that's as big of a deal as it otherwise might have been. But yeah, I mean, the leadership stuff, it's one of two things. Either Ron is just completely selling out on what he believes, or Ron knows some things that the rest of us don't.
Now, quick follow-up. Do you believe that Ron Rivera and company, and when I say in company, meaning his whole Carolina Panthers staff and also Martin and Marty, do you believe that they are on the hot seat this season?
Well, I would have said yes. And then we got the news a little less than a week ago that Scott Turner just got a contract extension for through 2024, I think it is. His deal runs through the same season that Ron's deal runs through. Ron got a 5-year deal. So to me, I'm like, well, if the head coach is on the hot seat, what are we doing extending his OC? So that seems to push back against the idea that Ron's on the hot seat. That said, I mean, Dan Snyder's filthy rich. So if Dan wanted to fire everybody after this upcoming season, he could. I mean, he could afford it if he wanted to. So, yeah, I mean, I think Ron is on the hot seat. I don't know that it's as piping hot as we might have otherwise suspected, but he himself has said it's time for us to start to take that next step forward. Like, he gets it. I think that's part of why, I think that's a huge reason for why there has been this desperation this offseason for the franchise to get itself a franchise quarterback, because the team hasn't had a winning season since 2016. Ron has yet to have a winning season. And, you have this relaunch with the new name and the new brand. And one of the worst things you can do in business and in marketing is start something new with a product that isn't very good. So I think for business purposes, there's a real pressure for the team to have itself a good season this coming season. So, yeah, I mean, I think, like, if the team completely craters, like, let's say the season ends up being a horrific season and the team goes, like, 4-13 or something awful like that, then I think Ron's in trouble. What I think is going to be interesting is, let's say this season ends up being like the last 2 seasons where, it's not all bad, but it's certainly not great. Well, then what? Now, if the team has a winning record, if the team goes 9-8 or better, then I think, all right, things maybe are trending upward. But if this is another 7-10 type season, I think that's what's going to be tricky. And it's going to depend to me on what the 7-10 looks like. If the team loses a bunch of close games, but the offense is improved and the defense is improved, well, then I think you can build off that. But if this is another one of these lackluster years where the team gets off to like a 1-5 start and the point differential is really bad and you have all kinds of weird things happening, like we had weird things happening last season with something like the defense being really bad early in the year, and the John Allen Duron Payne fight, even though that's an isolated thing, but it's like, why is that happening? Then I think things might be a little different. So it's going to depend on not just what the record is this coming season, but I think also on what goes into that record being whatever it is.
So I think you brought up a valid point. I think it's probably good and it's a good time right now to actually define it. Fellas, what exactly does success and failure look like with Carson Wentz? Besides the quote unquote ultimate goal, which is win the Super Bowl. Obviously we know that, but despite that, like, if you're not making the Super Bowl with Carson Wentz, right, what is defined success where you know that you're going to be with Carson Wentz for the foreseeable future? And then what is defined failure? Like, is it does it have to be that 4-win season? Because to be honest with you, to piggyback on what you were saying, Al, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think 7 wins is going to cut it with a $28 million quarterback that you just traded for. And it just in general, 7 wins, it's going to be hard to really quantify that because what it indicates is also like if your defense lets you down again, you like that strength up front. And in the back end, the guys that you signed, it kind of compromises or contradicts or maybe even questions your scouting ability in a sense to have these guys on your roster. But what is that defined success and defined failure? Like, how do we want to quantify that for the 2022 season? Anybody can take the stab at this one.
Well, I'll go first. I'll say first, Carson has to stay healthy. I think if that's a failure if he doesn't stay healthy because that's been a knock on him in the past. Like that's one of the knocks people are saying Carson can't stay healthy and Ron is taking his risk. That's a gamble. Secondly, I think he has to win at least 10 games this year. I mean, like you said, 7 games or anything in the middle, it's not going to cut it. They have to be in playoff contention. They have to be at least in contention to win the NFC East this year for this to be considered a success. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think for me, the offense needs to be in the top 10 in the league, especially when you go out there and you extend Scott Turner and you really haven't seen anything from him. So it's kind of asinine to me to extend him when he just got this new quarterback. You haven't even seen what he's going to do with this strong arm quarterback. It's crazy to me. So in my opinion, that's what success looks like. The wins, I mean, it's a team. So at the end of the day, both sides of the ball have to be hitting in order to win 10 games. It can't just be on one side of the ball to win those games. Failure, I mean, like you said, Dre, health. If he doesn't stay healthy, and you're right back playing with Taylor Heineke again. And we all know how that has went. So, I mean, that's ideally how I look at it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say 9 wins, unless, like I said, the win total is less, but there's just some bad luck involved and the team otherwise is improved. I think it's interesting with Wentz because statistically speaking, he did have a good 2021 season. Like the thing you've seen a lot of is, well, we would have taken what Carson Wentz did statistically in a heartbeat last year. It's not as simple as that, as we know with quarterbacks. And I was glad that AJ brought up the 7-pick thing with Wentz from last season. He had 7 interceptions. He threw many more interceptable passes. So it's like, it can't be just as simple as like what the raw numbers are. We're going to know as fans watching the games and following the team whether Wentz is playing well. And so, what you want with Wentz is by the end of the season, no doubt for him to have stayed healthy, but also to feel like he has had a good season. And, if the numbers back that up, great. If the numbers aren't sparkling, that doesn't necessarily mean that he hasn't had a good season. Just like if the numbers are good, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's had a great season. But, they cannot, to me, be looking at Wentz as, okay, he's our answer for now. I think you set him up for success. You certainly hope that he does well, but I think they need to have other things cooking here at quarterback. I think they need to be open to drafting a guy, and I think they need to have a multi-pronged approach until something sticks. What you don't want is for them to waste a year or multiple years on Wentz, and it ends up being a road to nowhere. So it's like you can do more than one thing at a time, right? You can have Wentz as your starter and be setting him up to succeed while also trying to have other potential options at quarterback. And I just hope that the team is thinking in that way. Ron suggested that it is on Thursday, and I hope that he meant what he said.
But Al, to bring up what you just said, that's the same thing that Philadelphia Eagles tried to do when they drafted Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round, and we've seen how that debacle turned for them. It really made Carson Wentz salty. So if this team goes out there, I feel like Ron just said that just so that during the draft, maybe teams that are intrigued, they move up for a quarterback will think, damn, we need to get up to 11 so that we could, get this quarterback that we want, and maybe we can move back in the draft some. But ideally, if you set up Carson Wentz in that nature where you go and draft the quarterback in round 1 or 2, even 3, well, you don't even have a 3rd round pick, if I'm not mistaken. If you take a quarterback 1 or 2, you're pretty much replicating the situation with the Philadelphia Eagles for him again, and it's not going to go well. So you're kind of locked in with Carson Wentz and Taylor Heineke as your quarterbacks Don't you think so? If you think about it from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. My answer would be, well, Carson Wentz needs to put on his big boy pants and stop being so sensitive, you know? Like, this is what we were talking about earlier. Carson Wentz needs to grow up, if in fact he needs to grow up. Like, again, there's a lot we don't know here, right? But if in fact he's been ultra sensitive about, oh, they took Jalen Hurts and that's threatening to me. No, the right response from an alpha male, from an alpha franchise quarterback is, I don't care. I'm better than that guy. I'm going to go out. I'm going to do well. I'm going to conquer. And they're going to end up regretting having drafted that guy. But that's okay. You know, like, I think Wentz has got to get out of this mentality of, if there's any competition, oh my gosh, they don't like me. Like, what am I going to do? Like, I think he needs to man up a little bit. I think that's part, honestly, of what Chris Ballard was talking about in those comments at the Combine about Wentz. I think he's got to sack up a little bit with all this stuff. And if he is thrown off by them drafting a quarterback, then he ain't the guy, okay? Then they need to move on from him after this year. You cannot have someone like that as your quarterback. You've got to have someone who is cocky, you know, in a good way, but who has that athletic arrogance, who believes in himself and who delivers on that belief. And so I almost feel like drafting a quarterback might be a good test here. Now, look, I don't want them to take a quarterback just to take a quarterback. Part of the reason the Commanders may have made this trade is that the team doesn't truly like any of the quarterbacks in the draft. If that's the truth, then fine. Don't waste a pick on a quarterback just to say that you take a quarterback. My thing is, if you like, say, Malik Willis, or you're intrigued by Malik Willis, or you like Kenny Pickett, or you're intrigued by Pickett, and you think he's worth taking, don't not take him because you've made this trade for Carson Wentz. Don't feel like you have to take a quarterback, but don't not take a quarterback just because you have Wentz. And definitely don't not take a quarterback because you're worried about Carson's feelings. Carson's feelings should not be dictating anything to me with this team right now.
Absolutely. All right, Al, so before we get out of here, let's get one more thing out the way, just the other aspects of the team, and we'll close out with this question. Just understanding Washington has created additional holes because of the Wentz trade following the Wentz deal. Interior defensive line issues now have come about with Ioannidis and Settle being gone. Landon Collins and Washington failed to reach an extension agreement or a restructure, so he's released, and Eric Flowers was cut as well. Now, obviously, Washington has signed Norwell to fill in on Flowers' shoes, but if you had to identify your top three priorities, your offseason priorities for Washington, how would you outline those three?
Yeah, I mean, one is one that gets talked about all the time, but it's legitimate, and that is this need for a starting caliber middle linebacker. I do think the linebacker thing can be a little overrated. The team last season played a lot of the time with just two linebackers on the field. Now, you might say, well, that's a chicken and egg thing. The team did that because the team didn't have three quality linebackers, and that may be the reason. But in today's NFL, a lot of teams, you know, you're in nickel so often, a lot of teams are only going with two linebackers for massive chunks of games. That said, you do want to upgrade at linebacker. Pretty clearly, the team is done with Jamin Davis as an option as a middle linebacker. He's going to be on the outside. So I think you definitely want to get middle linebacker. I think tight end is a real concern here because I'm not confident that Logan Thomas is going to be good to go for the start of the season. I hope he is. I'm rooting like crazy for the guy, but he suffered his torn ACL in early December. That's a big ask for him to be good to go come week one of the season. And even if he is good to go, you know, these days you can't have enough good tight ends. Yeah, and the tight end has become a big part of NFL offenses right now. So, you know, I like John Bates as much as the next guy does, but I think you got to figure out some depth at tight end. So I'm looking at that. And then the third thing to me is you can never have enough quality on your back end on defense. And when the defense was really struggling in the first half of this past season, the defensive front was not perfect by far, but the real issue was the secondary. Now, I think a lot of that had to do with schematic stuff. I do think their secondary is talented. I think a lot of this had to do with the way the team was doing defense. And what's been said is that once Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera simplified things on the back end, the defense improved. That's why you had that 4-game winning streak during which the defense is really good. But that said, you know, after Kendall Fuller and William Jackson III, is there another corner on this team who you love? You know, is there another corner on this team who you feel great about? And like I said, teams are in nickel so often now, you really need three starting caliber corners, right? Because you're using three corners so often. And to say nothing of injury. I mean, William Jackson III did miss a decent amount of time last year due to injury. So I think the team should be thinking corner, looking at corner. So those would be my 3 kind of things to be looking at here right now for the Commanders.
Absolutely. Al, man, it's been great. I appreciate your time as always, and I appreciate the work that you are doing on your side. This is Plug Talk. Just let the people know everything that you got going on, where they can hear from you, see from you in terms of your tweets or whatever, and let the people know this everything that you got.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Al Galdi. I do 2 podcasts. I do the Al Galdi Podcast. New episode is out each weekday morning in the 5 a.m. hour. So we're out Monday through Friday. Talk a lot of Commanders. Talk about other Washington, D.C. area teams as well. Nationals, Wizards, Capitals, Maryland, Georgetown, Orioles, etc. And then I also do the Nats Chat podcast with Mark Zuckerman. So if you're a Nats fan, definitely check that out. We do a post-game show for every Nats game during the season. But yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. Really appreciate you guys having me on very much. So thank you.
Appreciate you, Al.
Absolutely. So this is another episode of the Trap or Die Podcast. Y'all be safe. Enjoy y'all evening. Enjoy y'all day whenever y'all watching this. Catch y'all next time. Peace.